Hi, folks. This is Jeph Loeb, and welcome to the show. You're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Well, greetings, Cap fans. Welcome to a very special episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. It's episode 294. Why is it special? We've got a special guest, and I'm your host, Rick Verbanis. You know me. You know my co-host. He's the best gosh darn one out there. His name is Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. Remember Sully, when I promised to kill you last? I lied.
Is that now? Hold on a second. I'm not 100% sure here, but I think that's Schwarzenegger. And if I'm right, I think it was his inauguration speech when he took the helm as the governor of California.
He might have lied during that.
Yeah.
He was a politician, so wouldn't put it past him. No, that was John from the Matrix.
The John from the Matrix?
Oh wait, no. Sorry, John Matrix from the Commando.
Oh, Commando. That
Remember
was
that movie?
a classic mid 1980s movie.
Yeah. I am not talking about underwear preferences. I'm
No.
talking and why would I quote you from the movie Commando, Bob?
Well, I'm guessing it's because we have a special guest on tonight, Rick, who was involved in writing the script for that movie. I mean, it's a natural choice. I would have gone maybe with Teen Wolf,
Mm.
but Commando, pretty good selection.
Yes, Jeph Loeb is joining the show today. We are very excited to have him on to talk about his Captain America work, which, wow, there's been so much, and we can't wait to get into that with him. But yeah, he's also, oh, I don't know, a household name with people who are familiar with his work on TV and movies, including Commando. So he was the writer for that movie. And what a classic line. I mean, right? Like
Yeah,
that's up there with, other Schwarzenegger, I'll be
sure.
back. And
Yeah, right.
remember, I promised I'd kill you last. I lied. Come on.
That's a great one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Cool
Um,
movie.
yeah.
Alyssa Milano was in that movie.
Oh,
Remember that?
yeah.
Yeah, played his
Yeah.
daughter. Went on did.
Who didn't have a crush on her?
What was that? What was that show?
Who's
She
the
was.
boss?
Who's the boss? Yeah, with Tony
Mm-hmm.
Danza, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Biggest crush on her.
we're dating ourselves.
I don't think it went away.
Yeah.
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 Still a fan.
Yeah. Speaking of
But
dating ourselves, Rick, you know what happened to me
uh,
this week?
I want to date Alyssa Milano, but go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I started going to the gym.
Yeah.
So I've been going to the gym,
We've been
about
talking about
I don't
that.
know, three and a half weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sitting there, I'm minding my own business, got my headphones in, get my pump on, and I got a Marine Corps shirt on,
Mm-hmm.
and this guy comes over.
Semper Fi.
This old guy comes over to me, and white hair and like wrinkles, and like hobbles on over to me, and he's like, and so I take out my earphone, and he's like, "Oh, I noticed a shirt. You're in the Marines." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, my dad was in the Marines." And he like takes out his cell phone and he shows me a picture of his dad. His dad's like 94, sitting in a wheelchair, wearing his dress blues, and he's
Oh,
super proud of his dad.
sure.
And we got to talking. And during that conversation, this is what he said. He said, "Guys our age." Which stopped me in my tracks, right? Because my brain shut down for a second, right? And I'm like, what did he just say guys our age? Because he's old. He just hobbled on over here with his white hair and his wrinkles. I'm like, is he still talking to me?
Uh-huh.
So
No, wait a minute. If his dad's
yeah.
94, I mean,
Yeah.
he could be anywhere from 60 to 70.
Well, my dad, would be 92, I think, this year.
Uh-huh.
So 90, 92, 94 this year. Yeah, so it checks out, man. It checks out. So I don't know. So anyway,
That was a sobering moment.
it really was. It took some wind out of my sails.
Uh-huh.
So.
I didn't want to say anything because last episode or maybe the one before that, we were talking about, that was during the Fallen Sun recap episode, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about going to the gym and then why you picked this gym because you're competitive and you wanted
Yeah.
to be there. And you went in there and you were like, oh, it's a sea of white hair. Dude, I'm looking at you right now.
Right. Yeah.
You
I
fit in.
know.
That's
I
all I'm
know. I
saying.
know. It's the light. It's just the light glinting off my hair. I think
Is
that's,
that what it is?
yeah, it's coming
Well,
through.
hey, listen, I'm just glad you're not going, oh, my eyes from the sun hitting my bald head and the reflection there. So,
Yeah. See,
yeah.
we all got issues.
Yeah. Anything else going on with you this week, Bob?
Yeah, very exciting, Rick. Like you, I am a huge fan of the Greatest American Hero television show. When did that
Oh
come out? Was that
yeah.
like 81 or
That
82? Around there
that
something?
I would yeah, that reads about right. I remember the house I was in at the time
Mm-hmm.
because so that helps place the time period for
Sure.
me.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the garage. One of my chores was to sweep the garage, and I remember singing to the top of my lungs, believe it or not, I'm
It's a
walking
classic.
on air. I never thought I could feel so.
Yeah.
Come on, so free, flying
Flying
away
away on a
on a wing
wing
and
and
a
a
prayer.
prayer.
Who
Who
could
could
it
it
be?
be?
Believe
Believe
it
it
or
or
not,
not,
it's
it's
just
just
me.
me.
There you
Yeah, it's a
go.
classic, right?
Right?
It's a classic. So
Yeah.
anyway, I was like scrolling through Facebook, a week and a half ago or so, and I saw that they were coming out with with the Greatest American Hero comic from a company called AMP, a small
Oh, really?
independent publisher, and for Free Comic Book Day, there was going to be a free comic from AMP for the Greatest American Hero. So
Oh, I didn't see that at my shop.
yeah, so I ordered it, off eBay, of course, and it got delivered today. So I was very excited to get that because I was like, oh man, I can't wait to read this because I really, really love that show. I was thinking, I imagine and I challenge all of our fans out there, we're all shaped by exposure to things that we read or saw or listened to when we were a kid, whether it's movie or TV or films or books or comics, and of course we all are shaped by Cap stuff because we all read that as kids. But I started making a list of all of the movies that I used to like really, really love as a kid, or TV shows, right? Because I'm like, oh yeah, these are all, and Greatest American Hero, definitely one of those, right? Formative influence on me. So I think it's fun to do that, right? Because I wanted to like share it with my kid. Like these are the things that I watched that really, really like struck me in the heart.
And not all of them age well.
Yeah, are we talking about
different movies and TV shows? I mean,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
some of them just don't age well.
No, I know. You go back and you watch them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about this conversation before.
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, you try to show a film to your kids, and they're like, "This isn't funny at all."
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, happens.
Oh boy. Yeah. I loved Greatest American Hero. I will have to take a look at that comic. Do you know if it's set in the same time period as the
I believe it
show,
is. Yeah, I
is
just had a chance to flip through it before we got on the air, and so I'm not sure, but I think it is. I think it does take place in the same time period. So.
Yeah, I have to check that out.
Yeah.
Birthdays. There are some birthdays that are happening in the comic world. Joe Rubenstein. Now, if you're listening to this on the day it comes out, today's June 3rd. Joe Rubenstein is June 4th. And if you recall, all the way back in episode 8 is when we had Joe Rubenstein on. That was the very beginning of 2021, Bob. So
years ago.
Yeah. I am almost afraid to listen to it now and hear how we listened to or sounded back then. But anyway, I do recall it was a fun conversation, and he had a lot of let's just say fun stories about various people that he liked and didn't like during his time working on the Captain America series with John Byrne, talking about inking Kevin Maguire on the Adventures of Captain America. So check that out, episode 8.
Yeah. Yep. Good stuff.
And also speaking in interviews, because we're going to get to Jeph Loeb here in a second, but you can always go to our website, CaptainAmericaComicBookFans.com, and go /categories/interview. And you will see the dozens and dozens of creators that we've had on the show, and just scroll through all of those. And most of those are evergreen interviews because we're talking about past work.
Sure. Yeah.
So you can always check that out. And also on our YouTube channel, which you could see the link in our notes, we have different categories on our YouTube channel. Some of them are recaps. Some of them are uh, panel by panel dramas. Some of them are specials, and some of them are interviews. So you can always go in there too if you want to watch them, and check that out.
Well, I had a board meeting this week, Rick, and I've got a new trustee or a prospective trustee, someone who's wants to replace one of my trustees who's stepping down after, I don't know, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a high-powered lawyer on the East Coast of Florida and a very big environmental legal firm. And we went out to dinner on Thursday last week and talked about it, and told her about the podcast. Don't know how that came up, but she actually listened to an entire episode. Now, I'm not sure which episode. I didn't have the heart to ask, but I hope it was a good one. Hope it was a doozy.
I know, right?
Didn't put her off.
I'm the same way. I had a happy hour last week with the team that I'm working on, and the subject of the podcast came up, and people were like, "Oh, tell me more about it." And I'm like, "Okay."
Here it goes.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
really hoping it's not us being goofballs, and me doing the stupidest voices in the world, and
Yeah, hopefully it was one without British women's voices.
right? Oi! Hopefully it was one of the ones where we had some fantastic guests on and asked amazing questions. Speaking
Yeah.
of which,
Yeah,
should we bring Jeph Loeb out of the green room?
absolutely. Let's do this thing.
Our guest today is an award-winning film, television, and comic book writer and producer. From TV series including Smallville, Lost, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Legion, to starting his career with films like Teen Wolf and Commando, to writing some of comics' most beloved stories like Superman for All Seasons, Batman Long Halloween, Daredevil Yellow, Batman Hush, and so many more. Captain America fans know his work from Captain America White, Fallen Sun, The Death of Captain America, and the relaunch in Volume 2 with Rob Liefeld. For fans of the Ultimate Universe, he's written Cap in Ultimates and Ultimatum. We are excited to have Jeph Loeb join us today. Jeph, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'd forgotten I'd written all that stuff, but sure.
Now, normally this is the part of the podcast where we ask our guests, how did you get into comics and did you have a favorite character? But I feel like we have so many questions. We just need to jump right into it.
And jump right into it. I'm happy to try to give you as short an answer as I can, but I can't promise you that I won't start blathering. So if either one of you just want to go, I'll try to wrap it up.
Will do. So let's start with talking about your long collaboration with artist Tim Sale. Now, Tim passed 4 years ago on June 16, 2022, but the two of you worked together for 30 years, going all the way back to Challengers of the Unknown for DC in 1991 to most recently with Batman The Long Halloween Special in 2021. And many of those dozens or so works between received awards and high praise. What was it about the two of you that clicked so well?
I'm going to give you a disappointing answer, which is I. This could be a spoiler alert. So if you're a Magic fan and you don't want to know, just skip ahead. Uh, don't leave, but just skip ahead. But I'm a big fan of Magic. And I don't mean like, Doctor Strange and changing universes and all that other kind of stuff. I mean like a rabbit out of a hat.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether or not you've ever seen a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat. But what he does is he takes the hat, it's a tall hat, and stovepipe is what they call
Mhm.
and he turns the hat towards you so that you can see it, and it's empty. And then he puts it on the table and goes biddy bobbidi boo, hocus pocus mochas, and reaches inside and pulls out a rabbit. Now, he just showed you that the hat was empty. So, where did the rabbit come from? So, now this is the part where you need to close your ears or you need to turn off the thing or skip forward or whatever, because here's the spoiler, kids. And for some of you, it's not going to be a spoiler, but uh, the reality is that the hat has a false bottom. And so when he turns it to you like that, you're not looking at the bottom of the hat. You're looking at a bottom that's about a third from the real bottom. And so when he reaches inside, he lifts up the false bottom. He grabs the rabbit, which has always been in the hat, and closed it, and then pulls the rabbit out of the hat. Ta-da! Okay, so what I've now done, for those of you that don't know how that trick is done, is I've now ruined it for you. I have now taken something that was magic and I've explained it to you. So all you have left is a man, a rabbit, and a hat that has a false bottom. That's not magic anymore. So the answer to your question, because I'm sure you're sitting there going, what does this have to do with Tim Sale? Is that I don't know. I don't know what made the magic between me and Tim. But what I don't ever want to do is understand it. Because if I do understand it, then it's just a rabbit and a man and a hat with a false bottom. Um, I can tell you that he was he was one of the kindest, most generous men, people that I'd ever met. That he had tremendous patience, which you have to have when you're dealing with me, and that there were very few things that he didn't like to draw. He loved the medium. We had a lot. We were very, very different people. I talk a lot. He didn't talk a lot. He had very strong political opinions. I do, but I sort of keep them to myself. Um, he, but there were certain things that we both agreed on. There were certain comic books and comic book artists, Jack Kirby, Jim Steranko, Neil Adams, that we literally could talk about for hours. Um, there were certain characters that we could just, one of them being the Hulk. Certainly anybody that got what we referred to as a color book. So whether it was Daredevil Yellow or it was Spider-Man Blue or it was Hulk Gray or in the case of this podcast, Captain America White, um, they were things that he loved and he loved doing. Um, but he was very adamant about what he didn't like. And so when I would come to him and I would say to him, let's do an X-Men story, he would go, I'll give you two. Like, we're not doing the X-Men. We're doing two guys, Wolverine and Gambit. That's it. Don't start bringing in the rest of the group. I'm not drawing any of that stuff. Um, my favorite joke was that he would say to me all the time, "I can't draw cars. I can draw anything you want. I just can't draw cars. I don't like drawing cars. So don't put a car in the scene." So of course, over a six-part story, I put in cars just because I knew that he'd just be sitting there going, "Ransom, ransom, ransom." And when we did Captain America White, I said, "Look, we're going to be in World War II. We're going to be in battle zones. There's going to be jeeps and tanks, and there's going to be all kinds of critters running around on the floor. So unless you're planning on doing this in an airplane, which by the way is how we want to do one of the scenes in the airplane, was that his attitude was boots on the ground, like just stop. I can't. Now he could draw anything, and it just it's what he wanted to do, and he was very adamant about that. And a lot of people never knew that side of it, because he was just such a kind guy that they didn't know that if I said to him, "So then there's Scarecrow's going to be on a horse," and he'd go, "A horse? And who's going to draw the horse?" And I go, "I'm sure you'll figure out a picture of a horse. I'll try to not use the horse a lot." But if you go back and look at a lot of his stuff, one of the things that Tim was awesome at was that he would just throw shadow all over everything.
Hmm.
And so if there was something he didn't want to draw, like he would just put like big black whatever. Whenever you draw Batman, there'd be like two eyes and like a little something, and maybe you'd see the big ears and on the cowl, and then there's usually splash of black, and that was sort of his going. That was his style because people like Alex Roth were his mentors, and his favorites, but there was no like I'm looking at your background, and there's toys and there's pictures and there's a thing, and but he was amazing at being able to draw exactly that. If I said to him, the shelves have 16 Captain America action figures, and then behind that there's a Nomad figure, and then up in the corner there's a bunch of comic books, and then there's a little bit of a painting that looks like Jim Steranko did it. Like he would do all that, but there would be a lot of rassafrassa, or it had to be something that he thought of, which was if you look at a lot of Tim's storylines, and I wish more artists understood this, is Tim thought like a filmmaker, which is part of the reason why we got along so well, which was that he would set the stage. Even if I said close up on Captain America, widen out to show the Cap is standing in a toy store, he would just flip them. He would do the whole toy store, and then he would go into a close up, and then he would just continue along the way. And I defy you to come back and figure out as the story went on, where were we in the toy store? Were we behind the guy? Were we in front of the guy? Was there a thing? He just, his attitude was, I showed you what the room looks like. Now you figure out how this all works out. One of my favorites is he would do a beautiful shot of Commissioner Gordon's office, and it would be like a high angle, sometimes a Dutch angle, which is when it's like that, diagonally, uh, and then he would never go back to it. And you would just have to figure out where Batman was standing in the room, and you just have to figure out if someone came in through the door, they just came in through the door. He showed you the door, so he knows where it is in relationship to the rest of the room, but he's not going to show you the person enter. He's just going to show the door open, and then he's going to cut to Gordon going, Captain Lopez, what are you doing here? And then he'd show you Captain Lopez, and she was in the room, which is a very cinematic way of doing it. You didn't need to see Captain Lopez open the door, walk through the door. By the way, she's a detective, and come into the room, stand there, and deliver a line. It's just not how Tim thought or believed. And His artwork was beautiful. As time went by, he became very confident about the women that he drew, particularly Catwoman. Um, uh,
One in Rome.
and one in Rome. But also just throughout the Long Halloween saga, he just loved doing those scenes, and they would inspire me. I could see that he was enjoying himself, and so that's the way that he wanted to do things. Towards the end, a lot of the stuff, not that he couldn't, but he would just say to me, "Look, if we're going to make this deadline, 3 panels. That's all you get." And that would enable me to shoot very shorthand. So close up on Cap, widen out, see where he is, close up on Bucky, next page. Um, and his fight scenes were also, it was just, right cross, left cross, guy goes down. Um, and and he was confident enough to sort of feel like, I've told you the story, and I'm not doing it to cheat you out of anything. I'm just telling you that I have a deadline, and this is where we're going. That doesn't mean that if I didn't say to him, "Look, we need an extra panel here where the explosion goes off, or we need a panel here where we get to see a reaction after the explosion," that he wouldn't do it. But he was counting. He would get the script and he would go, "I looked at page 5, and I'm not doing it that way. I'm just gonna. You'll see when you see it." And then I would just sort of figure it out. But we also were all. I mean, our secret weapon was always Richard Starkings, um, who was the letterer and the designer of so much of the things that we worked on together, and a dear friend. And I always called him my good luck charm, and still do, because I won't. I mean, it's one of the things that when particularly Marvel or DC calls and says, "So we want you to do this thing," or "Do you have an idea for this character?" And I always say, "Look, before we get started, I'm doing this with Rich, and either you guys figure that out or you don't figure it out, but do not stick me with somebody else." And that's just because anytime I've worked with anybody else, it's just, to me, it's a disaster. Now, I'm sure to the average person, they're going, "We don't get it. I understand what is this page different from the way that Rich does it?" And the secret is that Rich knew where to put the balloons, and he particularly knew where to put the balloons when Tim was drawing the story.
Mm.
So, and that's because there's a rhythm to the page, and how Tim and Rich want you to be able to follow the storyline. He doesn't want you going from panel 1 to panel 3. He wants to make sure that you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 4 to 5. And that's Rich. That's not me, because I'm telling him where to put the balloons. But Rich knows that yeah, that's not happening. This is going to go here, and this is going to go over here, and then I'd read it and I go, "Okay, I don't understand how you do that," but that was his magic. And in the same kind of way that I would write, close up on Captain America, I want a squeaker. I want like just his eyes and his nose. So unless I literally wrote eyes and his nose, Tim might just do a side. He might just give me a profile, because the rhythm of the page, or he wanted you to be able to take you to the next page, and so he sort of felt like, okay, so the action needs to move in that direction so that you go from 4 to 5, and that's just because he was so gifted. Um,
And you went on, as you mentioned, to Marvel. You and Tim went on to do the color series that's referred to, the Daredevil yellow, the Spider-Man blue, the Hulk gray, in 2001, 2002, and 2003, respectively, and each focused on the early years, and also each dove into the characters' greatest loves: Karen Page, Gwen Stacy, Betty Ross. And then we get to Captain America White Zero, which came out in 2008. And one could say that this also focused on Cap's greatest love, his brotherly love for Bucky.
Mhm.
And what was it about your wanting to focus on Cap in World War II and his relationship with his young partner?
Well, there were a few things that sort of made it that way. One, which is there was a long break between what we now refer to as the zero. It was supposed to be the first issue, uh, and then what happened after that, and that was entirely on me. At that point in my life, I was doing a lot of television, which is very day to day, and it wasn't like when I was working in movies where you get about 3 to 6 months to write a draft of a movie. Sometimes in TV you get about 4 days. So just in the scales of things, just time made it so that I couldn't get back to Cap. Um, so, uh, but to answer your question, the the stories that we told, first of all, were the period that Tim loved the best. In other words, he wasn't interested in what was happening in current continuity. He couldn't stand when the editor would say to us, "Yes, but now the X-Men don't live there anymore. They live in a hover jet," and both of us would just roll our eyes. And I am not continuity's friend, and I know that, and I've said it. I'll say it here, and I've said it every place else. As far as I'm concerned, the only piece of continuity that you need to know is that Jimmy Olsen was never Robin the Boy Wonder, and that everything else is cream cheese. You get to tell any story you want to. And if I do ever tell that one story where Jimmy Olsen was Robin for an adventure or whatever, then the anybody listening to this content, this podcast should know that's it. I'm done. This is the last story I'll ever tell, and I really appreciate all of you. Now, I really do fear that somewhere Mark Waid is listening to this, going, "Yeah, I'm going to get to it before he does, so that can't use that anymore." But if Mark ever does tell that story, you'll know that he stole it from me, and then you can just make fun of him forever. But I'm not good at following the leader. If I'm brought on a book or I'm telling a story, it's because it's the story that I want to tell, and that is no disrespect. It absolutely is no disrespect to the person who came before me. Um, but when I look at the stories that people remember, and my favorite to use as an example is uh, Frank Miller's Year One of Batman
Mm.
with Dave Mazzucchelli. Um, that just dropped down in the middle of the regular Batman run. It
Hmm.
didn't comment on it, what happened before, and it didn't comment what happened after. It just, here it is, guys. This is the way. Now, I'm sure that DC had a choice and could have said, just like they did with Dark Knight, let's just do this as its own little mini series and see what's going on. And I'm sure that Frank at that point said, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm interested in being part of what's going on. And so when we were doing the yellow stories, I'm sorry, when we were doing the color stories, um, it was important that we didn't step on whatever was happening in the current book.
Mm.
And the the real challenge in Captain America was that it was a story about how he remembered Bucky. But at that point in current continuity, Bucky was alive. He was the Winter Soldier. Ed Brubaker had changed the rule and done it well. And so it wasn't like it was a secret that Bucky was alive. So I had to tell a story where it actually sort of took place in three time periods. It took place in uh, World War II, and then he woke up, and the he had to wake up at a time that was before Bucky came back, but that he was still in the modern era. And then he also had to have a third time, which was when he first woke up, which was when he was with the Avengers in Avengers 4. Um, and that was just a lot of juggling to make sure that even in those stories, I wasn't telling a story that never happened. Um, but as I like to tell folks, I think what Tim and I did really well was, and I do try to do this, is to tell the stories that happened in between the pages of the stories that you already know, so that you could, if you wanted to, and I, fortunately, there are fans out there who literally have nothing to do. And they've put my stories in chronological order, like within continuity. And I've just sort of sat there going, okay, fine. If that's what works for you,
Mm.
it's fine with me. But, please don't go on Reddit tonight and go, well, I don't understand. This story doesn't follow the story exactly that Ed Smith was writing, and you just ignored all of that. No, I didn't. I never ignored anything. What I always tried to do was something that I refer to as continuity through omission. And the one that's always comes to mind for me is when Tim and I did Superman for All Seasons, we got a call from the editor, who will go nameless, who called and said, I just looked at the first issue of Superman for All Seasons, and you're planning on having it. Are you planning on going back to Smallville? And I said, what difference does it make? Like, we're telling a story. I mean, he's not Superboy. He's not running around in a cape and a little S, which is the stories that I grew up on. But John Byrne just took all that stuff and threw it out the window. There was no Supergirl. Now there is. There was no Crypto. Now there is. Like, there are things that I put back into play, knowing that. But I had to have a lot of higher ups. I mean, all the way up at Warner Brothers,
Wow.
who owns DC, to be able to say, "Look, we're going to bring this back." And I'm glad that Kara Zor-El is Supergirl, and that they're making a movie that's coming out.
Mhm.
But going back to Cap again, um, the real challenge was to be able to tell a story about somebody that he cared about enormously. When we originally set out to tell those stories, I was just angry. I was angry that for whatever reasons, and these are not, it has nothing to do with the people that actually told the stories, because they told them well. But it really started from a place of the fact that Gwen Stacy was being forgotten. There was an entire generation of people who didn't know who she was.
Mm.
They only knew Peter with MJ, and that they had never seen or read Jerry Conway's The Night That Gwen Stacy Died. Um, and so they didn't understand that that was a pain that Peter carried in his life, because there was no point in trying to say Peter carried, because they they left Uncle Ben dead, but they didn't bring Gwen back. Um, and and then it started to be sort of a disturbing sort of trend. Karen Page was murdered, and Betty Brant, Betty Ross was murdered. Um, and I really felt that those women were as important to the creation of the hero as the hero themselves, as the costume itself. And so that's what I started. I started with a romance that a superhero comic broke out of. And I knew that when I got to Cap, um, that, yeah, I could have done Sharon, and I could have done Peggy, for that matter. And if I was telling that story today, because now Peggy is a television series, and now Peggy is what if Captain America or Captain Britain or whatever the hell she is. Um, I think enough people know who Peggy is that I could have told I think the Captain America movie has a very lovely ending to that movie of him saying goodbye to Peg and running into it. Um, and I think I probably could have used some of that. But at the time, if I did a Peggy Carter story, people would have said, I don't know who this person is. Like, what are you talking about? She was in like 6 issues of something that Santa Jack wrote and then went in the thing. So we just made up a lot of people and had a lot of fun with that.
Speaking of having fun, Jeph, I've got a little bit of a background in moral psychology. So when I read that final showdown that you had written between Captain America and the Red Skull up in the Eiffel Tower, when he's got Red Skull's got Bucky strapped and he's got the bomb and he's giving Cap that classic dilemma from moral psychology, the trolley problem, where you save one and or you let one die to save. And he presents Cap with that classic moral problem. Was that something that you had in mind when you wrote that scene?
I can't tell you the answer to that. Here's one of the things that when I talk to people, I they can't understand it, and the truth is I can't understand it either. So, and this is a true story. So I Tim and I decide we're going to do the last Halloween, which unfortunately Tim never got to really start, much less finish. He had done Russ for the first 3 pages, and again, we had agreed to do what was called the last Halloween special, and that became the Zero. And that was really just like it had been so long since I'd written a comic. Um, what a lot of people didn't know was that when I was working as the head of Marvel Television, um, Marvel benched me. They basically just said, "Look, you can't get paid out of two pockets. You can either be the head of Marvel Television or you can write comics, but you can't do both, not for Marvel." And I think that probably came from a day when there used to be editors that were also writers. And so it was like, that was the biggest done in the world. Well, who's going to write this? Well, me. So I'm going to get paid as an editor and I'm going to get paid as a writer. And I think they just came along and said, yeah, we're not doing that. So, and I also think that they were looking at my responsibilities. We were spending, you know, $3 to $5 million an episode. And so if there was, you know, 6, 8, 12, 25, like there were on Shield episodes, that was a lot of money that was going out the door. And I really shouldn't be thinking about whether or not I was going to make my deadline on, what's happening in the Incredible Hulk. And so I got benched. I would say to Dan Buckley, who was as of yesterday, was the publisher, let me understand something. So you've got Bendis and you've got Millar and you have me, and we are the murderer's row. Like we just like whatever we do sells for you guys. I don't know why. That's magic. But why would you bench me? Like you're taking a third of your roster and you're saying you can't do this. And he said, then don't run television. You can write all the comics you want. And so uh, I came back to do Last Halloween, which I really thought was going to be the sort of the swan song. There's so many times where I sort of go, "This is it." I'm getting too old for this. Uh, and there's so many young, really terrific guys that are out there, and they should have a voice. Well, they don't need me out here. I've been doing this since Challenge of the Unknown since 1991. Which is when it came out. I actually started it in '89. That's how long it took me to do my first comic. And so we're in order for me to learn what breadcrumbs we had left in Long Halloween and Dark Victory and Catwoman in Rome, and even some of it's in the Halloween specials. I had to read all of that, which I had not read in at least 10 and in some cases 20 years. And I'm that stupid that I would finish a chapter and I would go, wow, that was really cool. I wonder what's going to happen next. And I go, and then part of like the other, like sort of Doctor Strange has his astral form. There'd be like an astral form of me going, you're an idiot. You wrote this. So that was my long-winded way of, I told you I like to blah, blah, blah. That was to answer your question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't remember? Okay.
The funny part about it is like, I knew I love the Eiffel Tower. I love Paris. I knew that from just a historical perspective, the idea that Hitler and the Nazis marched down the Champs Elysees and were at the Arc de Triomphe, and I'm like, well, we got to set something there. We got to let Captain America like ride up the side of the Eiffel Tower. That sounds
Oh,
cool.
you mean,
Like,
Jeff? You mean this page right here?
yeah, if you actually own that page,
I do.
you have
This is
to
my page,
you have
and
to
you
send
you
that. No,
signed it for me.
well, then I don't remember signing it, but you need to
Yeah.
send that to me. That's mine now.
This is
Uh,
my surprise possession
yeah,
here.
no,
So
that's a prize. That's handling anything that Timmy's got.
yeah.
Wow, I've never seen that page before. There's so many pages when I go to cons and people bring up stuff and I look at them. But I'll go further than that. People will bring me a comic that has my name on the cover of the comic, and I go, "This isn't my comic," and they'll go, "Well, yeah, yeah, it is. There's your name." And I'll look through it. It's particularly when I was working in the X-Men and I was doing X-Force and Cable and I was doing X-Man all at the same time. And that stuff just slips away from you.
Mm.
And sometimes I will sit and I will look at it and I will go, I have not only do I not remember writing this, I don't remember seeing this. I don't even understand I don't know what the story is. So again, that may be that there's literally something wrong in my brain. There also may be something that's in my brain that doesn't want to remember the process, wants it to be a new experience every single
Mhm.
time I get out to set a story. I will tell you, embarrassingly enough, that there I will not tell you what the story is, but there was a story, and I was so excited, and I called Tim and I said, I was thinking about this all night, and I may have had a little dream, and it's kind of great. And what do you think if we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and this is the surprise of it. And it wasn't the whole story, it was like a chapter. And there's a long pause. And Tim goes, are you just messing with me? And I go, I don't understand. What do you mean? I mean, if you hate the idea, just tell me you hate the idea. He goes, hate the idea. We've done that story. I've drawn that story. And I would go, really? Oh, God. I got to come up with a different story. But,
All right. Well, then this is going to really test your memory and it shouldn't, because this was big deal. This was huge. Okay, so around that time when you were writing Cable and you were writing X-Men, or no, I'm sorry, Cable and X-Force, it was 1996, and Marvel launched Heroes Reborn, and so Marvel's main superhero lineup was struggling, at that time to compete with the popularity of X-Men and Spider-Man, but also upstart publishers like Image Comics. And so to boost sales and also modernize their classic heroes for new readers, Marvel created this pocket universe where they were reborn and had fresh origins and new storylines. And they bring back Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld to write and illustrate the relaunches. And Liefeld was taking on the Avengers and Captain America. And Rob originally asked Mark Waid, who was just on the series that got canceled for this, if he would script this, and he declined. Then I think Liefeld hired Chuck Dixon to script and Jim Valentino to script Avengers. But Dixon and Liefeld, they clashed over the direction of the Captain America, and then Dixon was dropped. I mean, this was like 2 months before the first issue went to print.
all of this is true.
And then that brings us to you entering the picture. Can you tell us how you got involved and what was that time like?
Uh, First of all, you cannot imagine if you weren't there that uh, this was the story. Like though nobody was interested in anything else. They were just Heroes Reborn was just it was going to be the new Avatar. It was going to be the new Star Wars. It was just this. I mean, nobody again. I have a lot of opinions about the internet, um, but you could do things like this and not have your story spoiled. And I had just come off of the magic that was Age of Apocalypse, which was it was like you had to be old enough in order to understand that Marvel, without telling anybody, sent a letter to the retailers and said, we're canceling the X books as of December. And in January, good luck. Not in January, there'll be new titles and new characters and new costumes and new ideas and new everything. It was just goodbye. And people went insane. But the only thing you could do was write a letter, or there were some message boards in those days, and people were just like they were going out of their minds. But part of the reason was there was nobody to be able to go, you've nothing to worry about. It's all getting flipped, and they're going to do Age of Apocalypse and blah 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 blah. So what you knew about Heroes Reborn was Jim and Rob. That's what you knew. And that if you were a big fan of the books, and it was sort of the first time I'd ever entered into a situation where I learned a lesson that no matter what you do, no matter what you're working on, when you go on a book, you are replacing someone's favorite book. You are replacing someone's favorite character. And there are people to this day who will tell you that Mark Waid and Ron Garney were telling the greatest stories of all time. And I'm not here to say whether they were or whether they're not, but I am here to say that they were selling 60,000 copies. And this was at a time when the X-Men were selling 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 copies. And I don't mean to break anybody's heart, but I do mean to tell you that the comic book business is a business. And so they needed to do something in order to take what was really the core. And it's sort of funny because Heroes Reborn kind of created the MCU because the characters that they picked were the characters that Kevin Feige and the MCU picked. It was Cap, and it was the Avengers, and it was Iron Man, and later it would be the Fantastic Four. Some of that had to do with whether or not the Fantastic Four was available to them. But and at the time, and Rob is a dear friend and someone who I owe a lot of my career to. There was certainly enough vocal people out there that were like, "Oh, he doesn't know how to draw feet." Draw feet. Um, uh, but what I think a lot of people don't understand is that Rob is to this day a creature of pop culture. He just, I don't, that's his thing. Like everybody has a thing. And people ask me all the time, like, how is it that you and Rob have stayed friends all this time? I said, well, it's because I understand that that you can take Beatles music and you can break it down and you can tell me until tomorrow morning that musically it's not the most sophisticated anything. But I defy you to play a Beatles song that you don't know. And also for you to be able to go, wait a minute, let me understand something. Most of this music that they did not all of it, but most of it, they did between 1964 and 1967, 3 years. And every single one of those songs is either a number one song or a song that you know. And you can't explain that. You just have to just accept that there are people in this world, Andy Warhol, who, some people look at Andy Warhol and go, it's a soup can. That's what it is. It's not anything else other than that. And it doesn't have feet. And you, but you ask anybody who's Andy Warhol, and they'll tell you, oh, he's the guy that painted those soup cans because he tied into pop culture in a way that nobody else has. Did he paint as well as Rembrandt? I don't know. I'm not an art critic. You can sit around and Reddit and have a nice day. But at the end of the day, what Rob understood more than anything else was this is what works. This is what people want to see. So there were two meetings. The first was he had set up a booth in, I think it was San Diego. And there was this glorious poster of Cap and the big red skull and a American flag behind it. And it was like for truth, for justice, for the American way, something like that he had put on the poster. And then on this side, it said Chuck Dixon and his name and all that stuff. It said Rob's name and then Chuck's, whatever. And I came by and Rob is a really exuberant guy. And if you don't follow him on Instagram, you have to. It's like the greatest show on earth. And as I'm walking by, I hear Jeph Loeb, what are you doing? And I turn around and there's Rob. Like Rob to me was like, you gotta understand, like he was the guy that was in the Levi's 501 jeans. Like he was literally at the time. I mean, Jim may have been the artist's artist, but Rob was much more famous in the world of comics. He had broken through into a world where people who didn't read comics knew who Rob Liefeld was. And so, which is extraordinary. Like name another person, they just deservedly, they just changed the street in New York to
Kirby.
Jack Kirby Way. It wasn't like there were a million people there. There were people who loved Jack like myself, and I defy you to find somebody who deserves a street named after them more than Jack. This is somebody whose altar I worship at. But stop somebody on the street and ask them, do they know who Jack Kirby is? They're not going to know who Jack is. They probably know Stan because of the movies and because Stan was great at promoting himself. And at a certain point, that was Rob. Rob understood I can be bigger than this medium. And was. And he started talking to me about Cable and X-Force. And I was like, wait a second. Like, you read what I'm doing with your characters? Because I have a thing, which is when I leave a television show, when I leave a movie, when I leave a comic book, it's goodbye. I don't go back. I don't read it afterwards because all I'm going to do is just get upset because they're just going to do things like, on Hush. I thought Hush, one of the coolest things about it was that, the Riddler, who I openly admit used as a punching bag regularly whenever Tim and I worked together. He was drawn goofy and he couldn't fight and and when Jim Lee and I decided to do Hush, I knew that at the answer of at the end of the story, that it was going to be the Riddler who explained what had happened. That in fact, it made no sense to me that in all of the decades of Batman stories, there wasn't one single villain who figured it out, who figured out that Batman was Bruce Wayne. And I thought, what a great idea to let the Riddler figure out the greatest riddle of all time. Who is Batman? So that you have somebody out there who at any time could blow his cover, but Batman was smart enough to sort of say to him, if you do that, that's the only trick you have. So it has no real value to you. So I gave them an out so that if everybody wanted to never tell that story again, it'd be fine. And I don't know, 6 months later, 8 months later, it wasn't that much later, the Riddler got amnesia and he didn't know who Batman was. And I was like, well, then what was the point of telling the story? It was the one thing that when Batman and Catwoman took off their masks, and believe me, that went as far up the tower that you could go up. It was so that we could change the dynamic of these characters who'd been around since 1940, maybe even 1938. And so that enabled us to tell Bat and Cat stories, and enabled us to have a real romance, and it enabled Tom King to be able to almost have a wedding. Like a lot of it grew out of it. But there was the poor old Riddler just back being just another guy who was like, ooh, I'm going to rob a bank at 3 o'clock. What time is it when I rob the bank? Like, okay, it's sort of.
Well, let me ask you this. So you did move over at volume 2 with Rob on Captain America, and we've got a number of questions from different patrons, and one of them, Kyle Foster, wanted to ask a question about how you tackled that sort of assignment. So he wanted to know.
It was
well, hold on. He wanted to know, when you're rebooting a character like Cap, who's got so much history and so much continuity behind him, how do you decide what's essential and what you can alter without disrupting the core of the character?
have to now explain to everybody. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Me, amazing. That when I came on that book, all those pages were drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Rob said to me was, I'm telling the story and you're doing the dialogue. So if you look at my credit on all of those, it's not my normal credit. It's not written by. I'm very proud to be part of the time that we spent together, and then eventually Rob and I would become partners and do awesome comics together. Um, Not just comics that were awesome, but we actually had a company called Awesome Comics. And that's because Rob is really a remarkable storyteller. So I can't answer that question as to what he decided to keep and what he decided to throw out. Was it? It was my idea to use a lot of quotes from history in order to sort of ground it into a place where people could like it. Some people loved that, some people hated that, but that was me. If it was in a box or a balloon, that's me. If it's anywhere else that's happening along the way, that was Rob.
Mm.
And I give all the credit to Rob. And I will also tell you that despite what anybody tells you, our first issues sold over 500,000 copies. I think actually sold 600,000 copies. Um, and by our sixth issue, we were still selling 200,000 copies, which was exactly the assignment. And I'm sorry to sound crass, and I'm sorry if you Reddit folks out there are now going to write, Jeph Loeb is making up stories. That's what happened. I have the royalty checks in order to prove it. But at the end of the day, you can tell me until tomorrow morning that Rob doesn't know how to draw feet. He does. There were people that loved those stories. Now, the reason why Rob didn't go after 6 issues and didn't fulfill the contract for 12 issues, that's a business thing, and that's Rob's business. It was not my business. I was hired to come on as a writer. So if you want to have Rob on the show and have him talk about what his relationship was like at Marvel, have a great time. But I still think those. Here's what I can tell you. I go to conventions all around the world. There are 3 books I sign more than any other book. I signed the Long Halloween #1. I signed Batman, I think it's 618, which is the first issue of Hush, and I signed Captain America #1. Now, if you have an opinion, which is that that was not a successful time in comics, and that Rob ruined it for everybody, and that Wade was the that we was the Babe Ruth of Captain America writers, great, have that opinion. I can just tell you what's happening in the rest of the world that you're not part of. And we had fun. And if you go back and read those issues, particularly if you read those issues now, because in the post Deadpool era, where there's a whole generation that doesn't know anything about, Rob doesn't know how to draw feet, which is what I refer to as his haters. The people that are now know Rob as the creator of Deadpool, they treasure those stories. And they treasure Youngblood and the success that he's having with those things. That's Rob. So I don't know that I answered your question, but that's basically what happened. And when I was on that book, I went from Age of Apocalypse to Heroes Reborn. I think that's correct time wise. If not, put it on Reddit. And it just put me in a different category. I had a lot of success with Tim, but a lot of people don't know that the Long Halloween never outsold Batman. One time we outsold Detective, but the rest of the time we were a mid-level book. But it was enough that it had a very loyal fan base, and people were really caught up in it, and people liked it, and then they collected it. And once it was collected, it was a completely different ballgame. And those Heroes Reborn collections, I still get a box of them like every 6 months. Marvel puts a new cover on it, ships it on out. And, that doesn't happen. If you think about, I'm looking at your spinner rack, which I have one of those. And there's some great stories in there. I'm not saying there's not great stories in there. You tell me whether or not those stories have been collected. Because that is the difference between whether or not a story has been commercially successful, not critically, commercially successful or not.
You brought up a lot of things there. I'd like to touch on a couple of them. So, Marvel abruptly ended the into 6 issues into Heroes Reborn. So Rob was left with a massive stack of drawn but unpublished comic pages that he intended for future issues of Cap. And rather than scrap the artwork, Liefeld decided to repurpose the pages for his new independent publishing venture, as you mentioned, Awesome Comics. And at first, he wanted to name the character Agent America, but Marvel got word of it and threatened trademark infringement lawsuits. So he pivoted and went to Joe Simon, who was the co-creator of Captain America, and he licensed the legal rights to the forgotten Fighting American property from the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
So now, with a shield slinging hero, Liefeld was clear to publish his previous pages that he did for Cap. And however, the pages had already been drawn to show Captain America fighting World War II Nazis and 1940s villains, which made it challenging. And again, enter you. You come into the picture.
Well, first of all, the pages were drawn by Stephen Platt. They were beautiful, and Rob was absolutely within his rights. He had not been paid by Marvel for the artwork, so he owned them. Stephen had been paid for that artwork, so it was clear. And so if what he wanted to do was, put a big star on his face and cover him up and just tell that story. But you know, Rob, particularly at that time, um, was a guy who enjoyed when you poke the bear. And when you said there was some copyright trade infringement, that's not just what happened. They sued us. Like this big giant monolith Goliath. Like if they just left us alone, nobody would have known that we even published the comics. We were a brand new little tiny publisher. But by the fact that they took us to court when there were so many shield slinging, flag wearing other characters that existed out there at DC, at Marvel, besides the Fighting American, it was just a ridiculous thing and very much done to try to squash Rob. And I can't get into the particulars. I know the entire story of what happened, but I can tell you that when we went to court, and we literally had to send somebody to New York because they wouldn't do it in California where we all were. Uh, it was like the lawyers at Marvel just had fallen asleep because we had a legal document from Joe Simon, who was alive at the time and was willing to testify that we had properly, legally licensed the Fighting American. And it literally, like, I think, well, first of all, Marvel didn't think we were going to show up, that we were going to run away, that we were trying to settle. They don't know Rob. And we showed up with a stack of comics that were, included The Shield from Archie Comics and Carlton or wherever the hell it was, and there were a lot of other Captain America characters at Marvel. U.S. Agent, all kinds of things that you could just go, well, this is just the same guy, just with a different thing. But none of that really mattered. The judge literally looked at the option, said, is Fighting American a registered copyrighted thing? And we said yes. And the judge said, and is this a license to print Fighting American? Yes. And are you doing anything different than what's in the Fighting American thing? And the Marvel got up and said, Cap throws his shield and Fighting American doesn't throw his shield, even though there is a collection where Fighting American is throwing the shield. And the judge said, no throwing the shield. Casey Smith, get out of my office. And that's what happened. So we did Fighting American. We had a lot of fun doing it. I think the Ed McGuinness stuff is amazing.
John, I just want to tell you, that was an amazing story. I loved it.
And, we were just, you got to understand, we were just having fun. And it, for me, it just came off as we were just a bunch of kids making comics and they were a big corporation that were trying to stop us. And if some things hadn't happened the way that they happened, it had nothing to do with Rob, then we were coming up around we were chasing, about to pass Dark Horse, so it would have been Marvel, DC, Image, us. And for reasons that I can't go into, because I've signed an NDA, we had to stop. And so now when I see Rob back at Image, back with his extreme characters, back on top, as far as I'm concerned, it just makes me smile. And that to me is what is known as Deadpool Rob, which is, once everybody found out, oh, you created Deadpool? Oh my gosh, well, I've been wrong about you from the very beginning. No, same guy. just you decide to change your mind. Have a nice day.
All right. So let's talk about what you can talk about, and that's 2007, when basically the Fallen Sun, Death of Captain America 5-issue series that you did. We
Five
we
or
have
six. Five?
It was five.
Can't
Yeah, it
feel
was
bad.
five.
Okay.
Um, and so in December of 2006, you were part of a creative summit at Marvel, and you got word that the end of Civil War leads into Captain America 25, which is the death of Captain America.
I wasn't got word. I was there. I was part of it. We had this conversation.
So tell us about that. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I thought it was great. Look, they had done the Death of Superman story, and I thought what Ed was doing on the book was fantastic, and Ed Brubaker, and the Winter Soldier was a hit. Cap was now, and I mean, there were very different stories than Rob and I were talking about. And uh, Dan Buckley, who was really good at this sort of thing, would said, there's uh, a story that I think we should have an aftermath story, not just a one funeral story and just move on and let Captain America go and do whatever. I mean, we're going to have enough trouble figuring out who that Captain America is going to be and how that's going to work and all that stuff. And uh, you have to understand that at these writers' summits, there's about 25 people there, and I would say about 15 of them are from editorial, and then 10 lucky writers get to go. I go back far enough to know when they used to invite artists, and that was just a waste of the artist's time because they would just sit and draw. They weren't there to tell stories. They were there to wait for the writer to go, this sounds like a cool idea. And I'm talking about really big name artists. Um, so we're in the room and we're doing this thing, uh, and I will tell you two stories that that there are people who tell other versions of these stories, but I'm telling you the truth. You can decide whether or not I've just been smoking too much crack or when I'm telling you the truth. But there's no benefit to me telling the story any other way. And that we were in the room and we've decided this is what we're going to do, and we're trying to come up with an end of what Civil War was going to be. And uh, someone in the room, and I don't remember, came up with the idea. It may have been it that said, well, then what if we killed Cap? And at that moment, there was a lot of like, and there are editors that have been there forever that are like, hey, you can't do that. And it's just death of man and all the reasons to not do it. But I was completely on the side of it's a great ending. And it should be in Ed's book. Like that's what it should be. And I'll never forget this, is because he's a friend. And that's Joss Whedon was writing the X-Men at the time. And he was Joss Whedon. Like to the rest of us, we were the ants that were like underneath Joss's feet. He had 3 television shows. He created Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, he was now doing this. This is before he wrote the Avengers and directed the movie, but he was Joss. And having worked with Joss on Buffy and on a bunch of other things, I, I can tell you that there are few people who know how to tell a story as well in any medium. Again, as we talked about, people have a gift. They're what I call the mutant capability of what they have. And so Joss comes in, and we're all like, oh, Joss here, Joss here. And I remember Buckley saying, uh, listen, we're all sort of an impasse, and here's the idea. The idea is that we should kill Captain America. And Joss says, yeah, it's a great ending. It's a great story. And to this day, there are people who will tell you that it was Joss's idea to kill Captain America. Really, when he walked in at the end of the conversation. So I told you that story because the other story that goes along with it is that we're now talking about what this aftermath story is going to be. And as we're talking about the aftermath of the story, I just threw my hat in the ring. Now, part of the reason why I think a lot of people respected the fact that I was doing it is that I just lost my son. I think many people that have listened to this knows that my dad and my son at the age of 14 got cancer, and at the age of 17 we lost him. And he knew everybody in the comic book community and was just this wonderful, beautiful young man. And I think there wasn't anybody in the room that was going to go, the guy's lost his son. We're going to tell a story about grief and what's happening to it. Of course, Jeff's going to do it. And it sort of at the same time, because this is the kind of thing that happens at a con, is that J. Michael Straczynski says we could do it as the 5 stages of grief. And each chapter would be that. And I then, sort of riffing off him, which is what the point of a summit is, said, well, you start with denial, and then you move into bargaining, and then eventually you have to get to acceptance. And I think what you do is let's get the top artists that we have, which at the time were like Linnell Yu and Dave Finch and John Romita Jr. And the late great John Cassidy, and McGinnis, and let's do this. And everyone in the room was like, "Ah, it's amazing! It's terrific! Let's go! Okay, now it's on the board. Well, let's go do this." And we break for lunch, and Straczynski goes to Dan. I was standing there. And at the time, Straczynski was sort of like, if I was talking about the roster, then Straczynski was like the number 4 guy on the roster. And Straczynski says to Dan, that was my idea. And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean your idea? We're at a summit. Like, that's like saying that Joss came up with who killed Captain America. Like, I don't understand. Like, we're here to freely give stories back and forth. Like, it wasn't your idea. And to Dan's credit, because that's the way Dan was, he said, look, we'll figure it out. And to this day, the fact that it says in those books, from an idea from J. Michael Straczynski, drives me insane. He didn't write it. What he did was he absolutely 100% came up with the idea of let's use not his own idea. Let's use the 5 stages of grief, which pre-existed him.
Yeah, like Kubler-Ross, yeah.
Yes. And put that as our structure for the story. Not, and it'll be this and this and this and this and this. But it literally, it was like, okay, well, and the number of times that we used to say things like, there's when they started a book called Uncanny Avengers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Rick Remender was going to be, he had some heat under him, and they gave him the book, and he pitched his first story, and in the end, the villain turned out to be the Green Skull, this brand new character that was an environmental terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in the room and I went, what are we doing? And everyone in the room looked at me and I was really, I'm now going to break the rule. I was a shit disturber. There was no toys back. They invited me to those things because I would go, someone would tell a story and then I would go, and then what happens? And or I remember somebody once said, and then Dr. Doom takes over the world. And I went, why? Like, who wants to take over the world? Like, who's going to run the planes? Who's going to pay taxes? Who's going to keep China from nuking the United States? Like, this guy, he's going to have a job? Like, that's not a story. Like, what are you doing? And I would say these things out loud, and like people would just be like, "Oh God, Loeb is insane. Like he can't help himself." And I couldn't. I would just be that way. And so I just said, let me understand something. The Red Skull is a character that dates all the way back to maybe Captain America #1. He's a Nazi. And we've told every Nazi, I'm going to take over the world story with the Red Skull, and he's had his brains beaten in. I don't understand why he isn't, because at this point, Magneto is a good guy. I said, why don't we just make him like, who are the most persecuted people in our universe? Who is the equivalent of the Jew in the Marvel universe? Mutants. Why isn't the Red Skull wake up one day and go, what am I doing? Why am I trying to take over the world? Why am I not just becoming the greatest villain the X-Men have ever found? And how about this? Magneto's Jewish and was in a concentration camp. We're all set, guys. And somewhere in there, there is a Red Skull story in Uncanny Avengers. Now, it doesn't say from an idea by Jeph Loeb. It just says Rick Remender, writer. And there is no Green Skull. As far as I know, am I wrong? Did I remember it wrong? Is Reddit going to kill me?
There is a Green Skull that did pop up somewhere. I can't recall where.
Yeah,
so
but it wasn't in the first issue of Uncanny.
No. If you're curious, the Green Skull, and I want to say was it John Romita Jr. He shows up. He's an environmentalist, anarchist, and he's only in like maybe the first few pages of a story, and then Cap just takes him out, and that's it. He's done. We never hear or see from him again.
Well, that is what Rick Remender pitched at that particular convention.
It might have been, you know what? It might have been Volume 7 of Cap, Rick Remender and John Romita Jr. Now I think about it.
That's right. Yeah, that's where it was.
And I can tell you that, and by the way, they never did that. The Red Skull to this day still is not bigger than Magneto. And I don't understand because Magneto is a good guy now, and from what I understand, he's in a wheelchair like Professor X, and I'm like, guys, stop. Like, and I think we would have gotten there in the Ultimate Universe because I think it made a lot of sense to go in that direction. But again, I left long before those are untold tales of things that happen. And by the way, anybody who's listening who thinks that the Red Skull should be the best X-Men villain, send Tom Brevoort a text and say, you do something about this, would you?
So Michael Johnson, he's one of the show's patrons, and his name is spelled Mikal, and he had a little bit of a fun question for you, and he wanted to know what it was like growing up with a normal name spelled abnormally, because when he was younger, it really bothered him that people couldn't wrap their heads around how to say it. Because people pronounce his name like Mikal, like the Russian equivalent, and so
I probably would have too. Good question, Mikal, and I will tell you, and that is, I had nothing to do with it. I know everybody thinks it's a Hollywood affectation because that's where I came from. It has nothing to do with it. I was on the way home as a baby from the hospital. My father was Jeph Loeb Jr. and my grandfather was Joseph Loeb. And it is pretty common knowledge that you don't name people after people in the Jewish tradition, particularly if they're alive. And my dad was most certainly alive. But my dad was going to take 6,000 years of history and just throw it out the window because his father did. And I was going to be Joseph Loeb III, which, by the way, if you look at Teen Wolf and you look at Commando, that's the credit that's on there. My dad was still alive, and I wanted to honor his name. And because my dad never accepted, my dad called me something completely different. But my mom was absolutely adamant that she was not going to yell upstairs, Joe, it's time for dinner. And here, yes, yes. And So she took on her own, took the O and the S out of Joseph and came up with JEPH and called it Jeph. That tradition was carried on when we had a son, and he was there was no argument. His name was going to be Joseph Loeb the Fourth, but we could call him anything we wanted to call him. I didn't care about anything else, and we called him Sam. I can tell you the reason why, but that's a whole different story. But and everybody knew him as Sam Loeb. But if you go to his grave, it says Joseph Loeb the Fourth, aka Sam Loeb. And but I will tell Mikkel that this has happened one time that when I tell the story, there are still people who call me this. There was a very brief period of my life where I was working at the very beginning of my career in like 1981, 1982. I got through a series of, it would take us the rest of the show for me to explain. I became an executive at what was then the HBO of Canada. And if you're Canadian, you remember, if you're old enough, that when pay cable, which was an unthought of concept, that HBO and Showtime existed in the United States, and and up in Canada, they were called First Choice and Super Channel. I went to go work at First Choice, and we were in a building that was a brand new building in the Eaton Center in Toronto. And it was the reason why it was brand new, and the reason why I'm telling you that is because the phone system hadn't been put in yet. So when you called the front desk, they would announce over the loudspeaker that there was a call for you. So they would have said, Rick, there's a call on line 7. And you go to line 7 and you pick up the phone. And I'm there about 2 weeks. And my assistant, who, believe it or not, was older than I was, came in one day and said, you know that the receptionist calls you Jeph. And I said, no, that's simply not possible. I've lived, 21 years of my life, and no one's ever called me Jeph. I've never run into a JPH either. But and sure enough, I hear like a cue. I hear over the loudspeaker, Jeph, call on line 1. So I take the call and then I wander down and there's a lovely young woman. And I said, listen, I understand. I know that it's confusing. It's spelled weird and you're Canadian on top of everything else. But here's the thing. It's PH, like in phone. She goes, oh, I got it. Okay, not a problem. True story. I am walking back to my desk and I hear Japhone call online. Japhone call online. And there are people to this day who've heard that story who call me Japhone.
Perfect.
And so to Mikkel, I feel your pain, but I only had it happen to me once. People somehow figured out. I mean, they had enough trouble with Loeb. I mean, they couldn't understand that Loeb was not Lob, was not Loeb. It was not. It didn't have 2 syllables. I would just go, it's Loeb, like earlobe, and I just would wait for someone to go. So your name is Earlobe, and I would go, no.
Silent
what part
ear.
of that story did you not understand? So yeah, that sort of seems like a good place to tie this up as any. It has nothing to do with Captain America, other than I have great affection for the character. A beautiful design, and throwing the shield is just, it's the batarang. Like you, every now and then, somebody comes up with an idea, and you go, "Wow, that works like crazy." And that it bounced around, and that you guys have maintained this love and have this podcast so that other people that love these characters get to play with them as well. Uh, and there are some truly great stories. And I will end on one of my favorites, which is, again, you got to remember, Tim and I were just fanboys. That's what we were. And I think that tells a lot in the way that I tell stories, which is that I just tell stories because I love the stories that I read that came before them. And And so Jim Steranko shows up at San Diego, and we turn into like 6-year-olds. We're like, oh my God, Jim Steranko's here. Oh my God, oh my God. We go over and we stand, I wait on the line, and we finally we get up there and we said, Mr. Steranko. He goes, Jim. I said, okay, fine, Mr. Steranko. Just wanted to say, like, everything you've ever done is the greatest thing that's ever happened in comics. And it's just the storytelling and the layouts and the beauty and the writing and everything. It's just amazing. And I go, and your run on Captain America is absolutely unforgettable. And without missing a beat, he sort of, in a very self-deprecating laugh, goes, a run. I did 3 issues and I couldn't even get them to come out in a row. And every single time I think about those issues, I think about how they had that one issue of Jack Kirby at 112, because it was 110, 111.
Mm-hmm.
Then Kirby does 112, and then he finished it in 113. And I have stolen from that. It's not even an homage. I literally have said to my artist, go look at Steranko's page, just do that panel. And it just cracked me up that here was this guy who, in my mind, was a legend, but still was kicking himself that he didn't do 3 in a row. And I just thought, well, then I got nothing to worry about. I've messed up things. We're much worse than that. So, yeah. So if you want to know what my favorite Captain America story is, it's Jim Steranko's. There's 1, 2, 3.
I don't think you're alone at all. Jeph, this has been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything upcoming projects that we can share with the fans on what to look for?
Well, I just finished, and I'm very proud of the first issue of Batman Wonder Woman with the incredible Jim Chung, who is, in my mind, really like one of the best out there right now. And it just came out, so you can still pick it up. There aren't a lot of copies left. Keep calling DC every day. Let's go to a second break. So there's that. I think everybody knows, probably for the wrong reasons, that Jim Lee and I are doing Hush 2, or as people like to refer to it as, Hush 2. And have fun, guys. Like, nobody knows what a Ford is. Expect that if you saw the Ford logo, you go, "That's a car." And so I said, it's H2SH, so people know it's the second Hush. And it was always planned to be 2 6-parters, because there was no way that Jim. I mean, I just do the math, guys. And we always told everybody, but again, nobody listens to you until it actually happens. So we have finished the 6th issue. Yes, we know that the 6th issue was late. We were there. And yes, it does end on a cliffhanger. So there's going to be an awful lot of people out there that are going to go, wait a second, where's the 7th issue? And all I can tell you is that it's coming, and that Jim and I have continued to work on it, but Jim is absolutely adamant on not being late. So it means that it's all going to come out in one form or another when he's done. And so, yes, we're going to wait a little while for that to happen. Meanwhile, my hat's off to Matt Fraction and Jorge Jimenez, who have taken that book and just rocketed it into the spear. I don't even know what the spear is, outer space. So on May 27th, which I think is next week or the week after that, or by the time this airs, will have come out, is the 6th issue and the end of part 1 of Hush 2. And yeah, I know you're going to be frustrated because there's a cliffhanger, but that's why they're called cliffhangers. It's beautifully drawn by Jim and Scott Williams inking it, and Alex Sinclair colors and my good luck charm, Richard Starkings, on that, and I could not be happier. And then at the same time, just one of those weird coincidences, Marvel came and said, is there an X-Men story that you never got to tell? And it always bothered me that at the end of the Age of Apocalypse. And that's part of the reason why I left the X-Men group, which is why there's only 5 issues of X-Men and there's not 6, even though that book went on to 80 issues, was that I got in a huge fight with the editor-in-chief. And I said, listen, we just told a story where the X-Men were completely different. Bad, good guys were bad guys and all kinds of things. And people loved it, loved it. Like we took the X-Men to another level. And then at the end of the story, it doesn't count. It was like a dream. And for me, that's the worst storytelling in the world. It's like if you're sitting and you're watching an episode of Smallville, which I love, and you're watching it, Clark, comes downstairs and Lionel Luthor is his father and Lex is his brother and Jonathan is the meanest man in town. And then, at the end of the hour that you watch, Lana kisses him and suddenly he wakes up in bed and it was all a dream. You just wasted an hour. Mm-hmm. And it's not fair to the reader. It's not fair to the audience. It's not fair to anybody. And I've never seen a dream story that people call it's a twist. It's not a twist. It's bad. And so I just said, look, there's got to be another way where these characters count. And the fact that Blink and Morph and some of the other characters that came out of that sort of eventually would come over and hang out and go back. And yes, I know there was an Exiles book and I know all that, but it never really made an impact on what was going on in the regular Uncanny X-Men book and in the X-Men book. And so I said, and they said, would you want to tell that story? And I was like, how am I going to do that? I'm not writing Uncanny and I'm not writing X-Men. They have their own stories. I'm not screwing up somebody else's story. And to her credit, Gail Simone stood up and said, I'll take that. I'll take the aftermath of whatever Jeph leaves. And I was like, okay, she's writing Uncanny. That's a blessing as far as I'm concerned. And Tom Brevoort figured it all out where X would go into Y and Z. And the same story that I had pitched is the story. And I found a young artist by the name of Simona Di Meo, who some people knew from Batman and Robin. But it was sort of not getting noticed at DC. And I said to Marvel, I think we can get him out of his contract. And his contract was ending. And I think we scoop him up. And I look at the pages and it's like, to me, it's what I want. I wanted the next Joe Mad. Because what made the Age of Apocalypse for me to this day was that's when we first noticed Joe Madiera. He'd been around, but when he came on that, the design work and the storytelling and all his manga influences and all that stuff, he exploded. I said, we need somebody like that. And so Simone, who lives in Turin, Italy, and I talk in the weirdest hours of the day. And we just finished the last issue. It's this 30-page mega. We followed the exact same format as Age of Apocalypse. We started with an alpha and then 4 issues of the regular story, the X-Men of Apocalypse, XOA as I like to call them, and then a mega, and then I'm done. Then whatever happens afterwards, for all I know, somebody's going to go, well, that never happened because the Riddler got amnesia. But it's there, it exists, it'll be collected. It sold like gangbusters, and I'm very, very thankful to the fans and the retailers that took a chance on yet another X-Men book. And because it had a great cast. Whenever Sabretooth's a good guy and you can't trust him because he's going to go berserk, that's what Wolverine was at the beginning. Like Wolverine now is like, well, he's not going to really hurt anybody because he's Wolverine. Like he's the greatest hero of all time. So like to have Creed, because that's what I call him, now become sort of the next evolution of what you can do with a villain that becomes a hero. Mm-hmm. Is a lot of fun. So to answer your question, 3 books: Batman, Wonder Woman, Hush 6, which is Batman 613, those of you that still play that game. And I don't think that XOA number 5 has come out yet. I think that's like any week now. And then after that will be this 30-page magnum opus that counts. Let's just put it this way.
Fantastic. Well, I know the listeners are going to want to check those out.
I had fun today, guys. You had great questions. To any of the fans that didn't get their question answered, I'm glad. I think the first guy's name was Clay. Was that did I make that up?
Kyle.
Kyle. And then my friend Mikkel, who I'm sure I'll run into at a convention and he'll punch me in the face. But this is still, for some crazy reason, a medium that I love. I know so many guys that left for various reasons. I know so many really dear friends that passed away as young men, whether it was Tim or whether it was Michael Turner or John Cassaday or George Perez or the Carlos Pacheco. That it's unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life because I worked in television and movies for 40 years. And you would think, particularly since that's news when some of those people pass away, we have a little tiny community that looks after each other. And to have lost people who I feel like are my brothers is part of the reason why I've had as good a time as I've had. And I hope that everybody that's out listening to this, go to your local comic book store and support those guys. That's a tough gig. It's a much harder gig than what I'm doing. Try to pick up as many books as you can and as you can afford. I know they're expensive. Get a layaway plan. I don't care what you do. Just make sure they're Jeph Loeb comics. Because I try to work with the most interesting artists that are out there. And I do think it's a visual medium. And if people ask me anytime, what do I owe my success to? And the answer is simple. I write the best story I can for the artist that I am working with. And I think it shows in the work because I respect what they're doing more than anything else. And so whenever anybody calls me from Marvel or DC and says, "Do you want to work on the Hulk?" I kind of scold them and I go, "Guys, after all this time, that's not how to ask me to come work for you. The way to come ask me is to say, Ed McGuinness is available in July. Would you like to work with Ed?" And I then go, "Yeah. Well, what's available? What can we do?" And I'm lucky enough that now in the business, mostly they go, "Anything you want to do if you're going to work with Ed." And so it's been a long time since I've taken a chance on somebody like Simona DeMeo, where like it's not a name that immediately people know. But I'm working with Jim Lee and I'm working with Jim Chung. It's not hard to do well. It's like I can be the best pitcher in the world, but I also have 2 home run hitters that are going to bring it on home. And that's the secret of my success is that I really do love what they create, and there is no greater joy. There just isn't in this business than when I write a script and a week, a month, whatever, I suddenly get. It used to be a fax, and back when Tim and I started, it used to come in the mail. But now I get an email with a little digital copy of the page, and I'm 6 years old. I am just jumping up and down. It is so much better than whatever I had. I can't draw at all. I can't draw a stick figure. Like it's embarrassing. And when Jim Lee draws your page, just sit back. Just get out of the way. Like you're talking about somebody who can draw anything. And I can point to every single guy I've worked with, and the worst things I've done are fill-in issues. When I was on monthly books, and they would suddenly go, Ed can't do this issue, and we're going to have this Ed Schmiercase is going to do it instead. I would go, that is a mistake. I wrote that story for Ed McGinnis. And if you bring somebody else in, it's like an architect designed it for a particular builder, and that builder is not going to do it. Or I would never write the same movie for Arnold Schwarzenegger that I would write for Tom Cruise. And that's the show.
Good point. Jeph, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much. I
We
really appreciate it.
appreciate your time, and we love the stories behind the stories. So thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming on. And
I've enjoyed this enormously, and you guys take care, and maybe I'll come back someday.
got to say, I really enjoyed our conversation with Jeph. He is not afraid to hold back.
He is not. Yeah, man. Once you get him going, like you wind him up, you're gonna get your money's worth.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, he was a real treat to have on. I'm glad we got into Heroes Reborn and
Yes.
the whole everything that was going on at that time, right? Because
Yeah.
we've heard other people's perspective on that, right? We
Yeah.
had Mark Wade on the show, we had Ron Garney on the show, we had Tom Brevoort on the show, and we had Catherine Schuler, Mark Grunwald's wife at the
Yep.
time, on the show. So we've got to hear it from all their perspectives, and it was great to hear from Jeph. Fingers crossed. Maybe I don't know, Jeph. Maybe you could put in a good word with Rob, and maybe we could have Rob on the show and hear his perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's look, you could tell he's it's sort of a reflexive defensiveness, right, about that run. And it's understandable because, there's been so much criticism and a lot of it unfair. And like from folks probably who haven't even read any of it for that matter. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'm sure he's gotten this time and time again. And like he wants to set the record straight from his perspective. And so, I'm so happy he came on the show and was willing to talk about that and all the other things that he talked about, and including the mispronunciation of his name. So I cannot, I know I'm going to be telling that story to other people about Jafone, because that was just a fabulous, fabulous anecdote.
Yeah, yeah, great question from Michael C. Johnson, and I just want to also say sorry to all the listeners and patrons who sent in questions. We couldn't get to them all. Obviously, Jeph is very verbose
Yes.
and got into some deep stories and things like that. So, we went for quality over quantity. So,
Yeah, and we got this, because Rick puts that script together with all the questions, and it's got all the patron questions in it, and folks don't see that, but we're trying to go by the script and ask the questions and make sure we get those patron questions in there. And a lot of times, when a guest is giving us a very extensive answer to a question and sort of just covers a lot of material, a lot of those questions are wrapped up in their answers already. And so, we just got to be sensitive to that, and sensitive to time. He was well over what he promised us.
yeah, that's true. Yep, absolutely. And as I think I mentioned a couple episodes ago, we have a ton of really high profile guests coming over the next few months. So we can't wait to get to them. And if you are interested in learning about who our guests are ahead of everybody else, and also the opportunity to ask a question, you know what to do. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/Cap Comic Fans, and you can get more information there about how to become a patron and what other cool perks you get for supporting the shows. And we really do appreciate it. And I also want to mention, because this is coming out beginning of June, in that I have some time off in the next week or two, and my goal is to get a lot of stuff in the mail because I finally got some time to myself. So thank you for your patience, and look for if you've got something coming to me, and if you got something for us to send to you, just look for an email from me, because I'm probably going to want to confirm your address.
Good. Well, understandable. You're juggling a lot of balls, right?
All right, Bob. Next episode, we're going to come back to our long tail story of Jack Kirby's return to Marvel with Jack Kirby's Mad Bomb. We're going to be covering part 6. If the listeners out there, if you haven't read or haven't listened to part 5, make sure to go to episode 291 and check that out. Again, as I mentioned about the YouTube, you can go to a channel there. It's completely devoted to all the mad bombs. You can knock them all out, and then come back next week for Captain America 198, which is Mad Bomb Part 6.
Ooh, I can't wait till next week, Rick. That's this story is really heating up.
Yep. All right. Well, that will do it for this episode. For Bob Lucius, I'm Rick Verbanis, and we thank you for listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. Oh, Bob. Remember, Sully. Oh, that's horrible. So bad.
That was bad. Yeah.
That was so bad.
I don't even know what ethnicity that
I
was.
don't know. Let's try this again. All right.